Hi, what do you imagine when you hear the word gacha? I bet that most likely an image of Eastern MMORPG comes to mind, where you are offered to use some item to obtain a character, a costume, a cosmetic set, a vehicle, a pet or a weapon. At the same time, there is probably some guarantee, like spinning a wheel of fortune 100 times and getting the coveted item. Surely, when you think about this, you also imagine the possibility of paying for that very item that allows you to spin the gacha. To be honest with you, perhaps some of you don't think in these patterns, but I personally picture the word gacha exactly like that. However, that's not always the case. Mostly, gacha is an element of casino mechanics. Essentially, it's an opportunity to spin anything and receive some rewards. In Corepunk, there is also a gacha system, and it's free because here you can reroll attributes and talents on items in hopes of catching the best combination for you. Strangely enough, like many other users, I constantly felt that this was some manipulation, an adjustment that favors the developers. Imagine my surprise when after experimenting I realized that this is not the case and that in artificial core there exists the most honest gacha of all in the gaming industry. Interested? Then let's take a closer look at this point. So, how did we come to this investigation? It happened that almost all Corepunk players in one way or another reroll stats on their items. As you probably know, especially if you do it yourself, the results often don't make you happy. It constantly seems like the game throws out completely useless stats, while what you really need doesn't drop. I will admit, I've fallen into this trap myself, especially considering that gacha mechanics in any game tend to be reached against players. Usually, catching a legendary item from a loot box is nearly impossible because the chance of dropping it is close to zero. Since developers are now required to publish exact probabilities of these drops, we know they are usually around 1 or 2%. For this reason, instinctively one might assume that similar problems exist with key stats in Corepunk, since some attributes are more important than others, and it might seem like the game deliberately skews the rolls towards worse stats. In such situation, a long overdue experiment was already quite obvious. Essentially, all was needed was perform a substantial number of spins, input them into the synthesis machine, record all the stats in a special table, and then fix the results of each spin. This approach allows you, dear viewers, to observe firsthand what results come out and, more importantly, to notice anomalies, deviations or nuances. Naturally, for such an experiment, a sample size is necessary. For this video, the sample was set at 212 spins and later increased slightly above 500. That's not a very large number, and believe me, one could easily run 1,000 or even more for peace of mind. However, after the first 100 spins, it became clear that rolling stats like talents behave strangely in Corepunk. By the third 100 spins, it was obvious that this was indeed the case. The strangeness lies in the fact that probability of obtaining any particular stat is literally the same across the board. It appears that the game has built-in algorithms that keep all these indications within normal range, something I will discuss in more detail later. For now, it's more important to know that by reaching around 500 spins, it became clear that the chances are exactly equal, and any deviations are merely statistical errors we will see regardless of how many spins we perform. Now let's talk about the pure numerical equivalent. Currently, there are 22 secondary stats available in the game. You can see the full list right now on your screen. When rolling on 3rd tier overclocked artifacts, you can get any of these stats once, twice or even 3 times. For example, you might get 3 chances for physical crit. Naturally, this raises questions about percentage probabilities under such conditions. Since no experiments had been conducted earlier, we didn't know if there was any bias favoring certain stats. However, based on the results of the spins shown on screen in tabular form, it became clear that the probabilities are approximately equal. Therefore, using a simple formula, we can conclude that the chance of obtaining any particular stat is 5%. But this refers specifically to getting one instance of that stat in a single roll. What if you want to get 3 attack speed rolls or 3 physical crit chance? That's where things get more interesting. First, we need to calculate the overall probability. Next, we convert this into a percentage. Thus, the chance to get one particular start free time in a roll is approximately 0.0125%, or about 125/10,000%. Rounded off, it's roughly 0.01%. That's not very high, but still exists as a real possibility. Additionally, you should be aware that during prolonged rolling sessions in the game, certain anomalies start to appear with stats. Yes, this is not a joke. A few minutes earlier, there was an opinion expressed that an algorithm artificially regulates drop chances for stats and keeps them within bounds, so they all tend to appear roughly equally over time. As it turns out, if some particular stat begins to lag significantly during rolls, meaning its frequency drops below others, it will eventually start appearing more often after some time, until its frequency roughly matches that of other stats again. It's important to note that the game seems to track cumulative occurrences of each stat. Simply put, single, double, and triple occurrences are summed together and reflect as an overall figure under which all indications are normalized. But that's not all either. The next anomaly involves duplicates often appearing in pairs. In other words, if you just roll two identical stats on your item, say 2 critical hit chances, the probability of rolling 2 identical stats again of your next spin increases dramatically, up to about 70%. Unfortunately, I can't confirm this visually with certainty. However, I hope you will take my word for it, because this probability is quite high, around 70%. It's very strange and doesn't resemble normal randomness at all, but it happens nonetheless. The most interesting part is that the chances of obtaining a stat don't change when switching artifacts. This, by the way, is the strangest thing about the synthesis machine's operation. Logically, when you roll the dice, some calculation occurs. The game constantly adjusts your stat to certain values, so that there isn't a big difference, and one characteristic doesn't become an outsider that almost never drops. Accordingly, the game should store information about this. And here arises the question, how does this formula work? It is calculated separately for each item or for each initial roll. In reality, both statements are incorrect. The system considers all your rolls because changing the artifact doesn't affect anything, and the stats will continue to be generated based on your previous results with the past item. This means that if on your previous artifact a certain stat, say magical penetration, was an outsider, it will keep dropping until it ceases to be an outsider on the new artifact as well. As a result, we get a paradox. Corepunk offers what is arguably the most honest gacha system of all existing ones, at least in the MMORPG genre. However, catching the desired stats is monstrously difficult. Why? Because there are 20 different stats, which reduces the chances of getting free copies of a specific one to just 1/100%. That's quite a lot if you consider how much this will affect your character in practice. But in economic terms, the sum is quite substantial. Now that we have discussed secondary stats, it's time to talk about another aspect – passive talents. Passive talents become available on upgraded or then overclocked 3rd-tier artifacts. The upgraded version has only one talent, while the overclocked one has 2. These talents improve your nodes in skill trees, making your potential stronger. It's worth noting that some stats significantly boost your power, ultimately allowing you to clear more challenging content. Naturally, Corepunk players spend resources to obtain talents. However, pulling something truly valuable is very difficult. Thus, legends have long circulated in the community about certain dancing around the issue that supposedly increase your chances of getting the right talents. For example, a common legend states that you need to reset your skill trees before rolling, because the system deliberately doesn't reroll what you are currently using. Honestly speaking, I personally tested this and found it to be nonsense. And after a recent experiment, I was able to confirm it. Currently, there are 120 talents available in the game. At launch, this number will increase to 150. As an addition, 30 talents will be added along with 2 new trees for professions and earning in-game currency. Therefore, it's already clear from the start that the chances of obtaining a suitable talent are quite low. In fact, this is true. With a simple mathematical calculation based on following formula, it becomes evident that the probability of getting a specific talent is only about 0.83%, with 3 decimal places extending into an infinity series. This probability is nearly 6 times lower than the chance of obtaining a characteristics that suits you. But note that there are 3 slots for characteristics and only 2 for talents, which complicates the situation further. The situation becomes even more challenging because ideally we want to roll 2 identical talents. To calculate this probability, we can use another very simple formula. As you can see, the chance isn't high. However, if we convert this figure into a percentage using yet another formula, it looks even worse, which rounds to approximately 69/10,000%. The probability sounds frightening, doesn't it? There is one more fact that might scare you even more. The odds of hitting the jackpot in a casino are not much lower. According to various estimates, they range roughly from 0.5 10,000 to 0.1 decimal place, depending on what you are trying to win. Surely such information sounds at least somewhat disheartening. Interestingly, despite these low probabilities for talents, the gacha system in the game remains fair overall, at least regarding talents, because their sheer quantity makes obtaining the desired stat simply too unlikely to justify additional complications in the process. By the way, if you are curious, the developers have already been asked why the implemented mechanic for getting suitable talents by chance is comparable to winning at a casino, where it is known never to lose. Do you know what Artificial Core's response was? Nothing. In conclusion, it must be emphasized that honest gacha is an undisputed advantage of Corepunk compared to all other games with similar mechanics. However, in current realities, this cannot be considered an outright benefit. Yes, it's certainly nice that your chances are always roughly equal, and that the system tries its best to maintain this effect. But still, the probability remains too low. This naturally raises the question: do developers have some tricks up their sleeve that could give us access to easier ways of obtaining suitable stats? There is no answer to this yet, but I hope they will provide one in the near future. Otherwise, truly high-quality characteristics after release will be accessible only to a handful of Corepunk players. That's all for my video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please give it a like and share your impressions in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe. It really motivates me to produce new content faster and helps you to stay updated with notifications about new releases. Thank you in advance for your activity and see you very soon. Bye!